scenarios I have not seen, so we all get the joy of experiencing them together, right? And it gets hard to do sometimes because I spend a good deal of time, rooting through these morons, and especially when it comes to the Flashpoint crowd and the Trumpsters that are out there, the Mark Levins of the world and the like, because I will check out that there's sort of the root of the argument, because I think you look at the seeds to find out what the tree's going to be like. And so I will go and I will find the basic underlying concept of whatever talking point we're hearing about, whether it's, when they push woke for a week, whenever it's reached Glenn Beck level, it's jumped the shark. It's already, this is their introduction to baseline Fox viewer. If it's gotten to him, if he's hammering it every single day, that means it didn't catch on organically, and they really have to, flood the engine to get this talking point, whatever it is, out there before it dies, because that's the other aspect. One of the things that we're noticing right now is the absolute death of talking points as fast as they come up. And I think there are two basic reasons why that is. One is that in normal life, something happens, people respond, and then it goes away or is solved or is recognized to be a problem that will require a longer solution, or is a permanent problem, and then you end up gardening that problem as opposed to eliminating it, like weeds or a disease. You can't just make it, snap your fingers, write a bill, and make those kind of things disappear. You can't. Any blanket solution you would have that would eliminate them would also eliminate so much good that it would create, another wholly more horrible problem. So over the course of the last 2 months, we've seen a ton of them. I think none more egregious than lumber. I think that's, if you're going to pick one out of the sky and just kind of pluck it out and stare at it, the lumber crisis, and oh my God, the price of lumber. It's look at Biden's America, the price of lumber, and then it just goes back down again because it was a temporary problem. The pipeline, that supposedly was going to drive gas prices to $5 has petered out at summer gas prices, even with the pipeline. The ransomware attacks that happened over the last few weeks, one of the more hilarious aspects of it is that, for me anyways, is the RNC just got hacked. I don't know if many of you have seen that news, just kind of came out a little bit ago, but the Cozy Bear or Apartment 29 or Fancy Bear or Leather Bear, whichever fetish-based end of the shining bear costume version of events you would like, they have hacked the RNC again, which is fascinating to me because they did it before. The RNC was hacked when the DNC was hacked, and all the John Podesta emails and the Hillary Clinton stuff came out. And in that, one of the things, and we've addressed this a lot in terms of the Hunter Biden laptop, the alleged, the much rumored and never produced Hunter Biden laptop, is the idea that if I were to be able to get a hold of all of your emails, whomever you may be, and I had them all for a period of time, and I was able to just kind of go in there and add sentences or pictures or delete emails so as to remove context from an argument you were having or a financial matter or anything else. If I could just take, you've got 8 emails between you and somebody else, 7 of them are that person threatening your life, and your financial well-being and your home and your children. And then the last one is you going, all right, if you don't get out of here, I'm going to, if you don't knock this off, I'm calling the cops. And if you ever try this in person, I will F you up. And then I just remove the first half of that last email and produce this email that makes it look like you, in the context of a greater argument, threatened the life of someone apropos of nothing. It's very easy to do. It's not complicated. And the only option you have to rebut that is to produce all of your emails to show the entire context, which may or may not be embarrassing, may or may not produce information about your life that would put you into greater danger or greater financial woe or endanger your kids or any other kind of thing. So you might just kind of general policy, in the we don't negotiate with terrorists area is if somebody's producing, sampled emails or pieces of rando information about you, the general policy is don't produce everything else in your life, because their entire purpose may be indeed to pants you in front of the world and make you look uniquely criminal, lonely, that your relationships don't work, that what have you, any aspect of that. If that was their ultimate goal, then the back and forth about getting you to do this or the releasing of that selective email is really just about you undermining people's view of you by sharing TMIing yourself to the world, and that's a strategy that works, right? So in the case of like Podesta or any of these others where there's all this awful coming out, and that's where Pizzagate was born, and them releasing emails and him going, I'm not commenting either way. There's no way to confirm or deny what part of those are. So the conspiracy theory rolls on, but then so does the rest of the world. So at the DNC level and all the Seth Rich stuff and blah, 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 all the conspiracy about that and the release of that, which always confused me. And this is my little piece on some conspiracies to me seem too good to be true, or seem to intentionally leave out a very strong possibility that if this, then why not also this? You know what I mean? Like if it, think of anything you want, Roswell, whatever. The government, there was a UFO crash and the government hit it with a weather balloon, and clearly they have aliens in a basement. And well, is it also possible that they have, or at that time, were testing a very advanced airplane with some sort of drone that who knows what, any series of things, and it went down, and to cover the site they did the weather balloon story to cover that, which is way more plausible, also a big secret, also nobody's business, and really has to do with national security. I mean, yeah, were there aliens at Roswell? Of course there were. And did they have giant heads and teeny little fingers? Yes. Did they phone home? We'll never know. But the reality, in all seriousness, the reality is that an equally plausible possibility at Roswell is that, yes, the government is hiding something, but amongst the normal shit that they normally hide, because they're not hiding it from the American people, they're hiding it from our enemies on whom that technology will likely be used, right? So the same thing, I feel, is true when it regard to the Seth Rich story, which is they, and Hannity got into big trouble pushing this, and the idea is that he's really the he's the sneaker net thief, that they weren't hacked by the Russians. He was selling this information because he was, a whistleblower effectively, and he was killed because he was a whistleblower, and that he was carrying this stuff when it happened. And the idea is that the Clinton body count being what it is, and this was the whole story, is that because he worked for the DNC and he was doing what he was, that and who he was working with, that they did him in for that very reason. There is another plausible idea, which is quite plausible, in that poor Seth Rich, and this is all fantasy, by the way. Don't mistake. I'm using this as an analogy. No one has any way of verifying any of this nonsense. I'm using this as a baseline for you to understand the if that, then also this concept. That there's also a possibility that there's a whistleblower at the DNC who's sneaker netting stuff out, and he thinks he's giving it to freedom-loving peoples who are exposing corruption, and then he realizes the guy he's meeting on the street who he's supposed to give it to is actually a Russian spy. It's really obvious. It makes him very nervous. He's not sure about doing it. They kill him and take it anyways. And that is equally as plausible in a circumstance like that as anything else, and yet it's never mentioned. So the same thing, when we get to the DNC hacked and stuff is released, but the RNC is hacked and nothing is released. The DNC stuff comes out and is real or fake, or a mixture of real and fake, which is really the way you do it if you're a professional. The RNC, we know it was hacked at the exact same time the DNC was hacked back in 2016. But they were just hacked again this morning. That is essentially, you're running into a situation where because the last time they were hacked or anybody got in there, they were free and clear. There's nobody that was going to go after them. The Russians were helping them, not hurting them. And then Trump's ownership, effectively, of the DOJ gave them a false sense of security as well. Now what happens? I mean, if the worst thing that can happen to you when you're operating, one would think, with mobsters, one of the worst things, besides, I think, you effectively being a snitch, but nobody gives you an out, and you don't have anywhere to go. The biggest fear would be is if you outlive your usefulness to them. That would be a major concern, that they just don't need you anymore. And in a situation like that, if you're not shark, you're chum. And they're obviously, if you get word that they're feeling that way, maybe you can make up for it. Maybe there's something you can do. Maybe you can start doing rallies and shit talking the United States or the American military or us in our relationship to China or any of that. You could go out and do that. See, I'm still useful. But there's also a situation where you may outlive your usefulness with these folks, and they don't bother to tell you that you're still under. I mean, from the keep your friends close and your enemies closer concept. At some point, when a friend becomes an enemy, because anybody who's not on the team is the other team, not just off the team, it can get really scary and sketchy real fast. So if they felt like they were losing their grip on the whatever Russian hackers were losing their grip on the Republican Party that they had previously, that's one thing. On the other hand, if they just know openly that stuff is there, and this just gives them a pretext to release stuff, or this story is coming out that the RNC has been hacked, and this sideline leak story is happening, much like the NSA Tucker Carlson story. Is this really are you really pushing this story out and acting like, oh my gosh, I'm an innocent victim of hacking, so that when the bad stuff comes out, you can go, I didn't, that somebody stole that, and that's not even mine, I didn't write that. You're using the fallback of the attack that you used before. It's a fascinating thing to watch in terms of that, but the idea that they've been hacked is not surprising at all. I'm curious what the cybersecurity at the Trump organization is like these days, if it exists at all. Because as much as Dad hates email, Don and Eric, I'm sure, are not as security conscious as their paranoid old man is. And he might ultimately have created enough of an ignorance firewall by not being included in stuff they are, or they have. And Ivanka and Jared are children of the modern age. And we already know they have, WhatsApp communications and encrypted software stuff. And if we know that, that means the government's already seen it, And foreign governments have already seen it, which is the crucial part of it. Sometimes, our government, and this is just logic. Again, sans evidence. What if you're thinking these things through? What you would really consider as a possibility is that if we know Russians or Chinese or the Saudis or the Iranians or the North Koreans or whoever might be scoping around for compromise on American citizens, American leaders, people entrenched in power, in the event that they do find something that is legit, there is a reason why you would want to know about it. You would, from a national security standpoint, okay, if they're hiding something, whether or not the legal system goes after them, whether or not we can get a warrant after we've already seen this stuff, or whether it's prejudicial, and whether we can, as a non-legal entity, if the CIA or the NSA or sections of the FBI that have, a legal firewall in terms of warrants and what they can look at because of the Patriot Act or what have you, as far as charging someone versus sending people to arrest someone because they are engaged in imminent terroristic threats or what have you. Knowing that stuff exists and going, okay, they're going to find out where this body is buried, and we know they did that. That's true. But a foreign power is going to use that to implicate 9 other people or someone they're associated with that isn't or may not or possibly is. We kind of need to know, because if that's going to affect our financial markets or whatever, it would be nice to get out ahead of it. And then that's where these stories come out that maybe there's been a hack going on. Now, this is my trying to think, in a chess-like manner about these kind of things. You have to. One would think you would have to, if you were in a national security situation. It's like when Alex Jones or any of these folks come up with this, like, there's a plan. They got this plan that they're gonna dig down and they got this anything where they're gonna round up everyone who's ever worn a plaid shirt for being a pro-Scottish terrorist. In that, like, idea that we found the plan, we have the documents, that there are so many people in national security, in the DOD and other places, sitting idle in peacetime especially, that basically war games of all sorts are played out. If you look at the movie War Games, and the idea that Joshua, the computer, goes through like every possible viable scenario to see what our chances of winning in any circumstance will be, and it runs it. The computer can run it in minutes. But back in the day, and even still, we don't have AI that can run every possible scenario with, and including, current geopolitical norms and stories and all that kind of stuff. We don't, we did not, and over the last, 50 years to 70 years of the Cold War and post-World War II era, the ability to break out all those possibilities, except by playing material war games or having people write papers on it. Here's the plan. This is what happens if we're attacked with mustard gas on the entire eastern seaboard. The chance of that happening, next to none. But is there another gas we don't know about? Maybe. Okay, so run the mustard gas thing, and then Jack gets numbers up by 3, Jack gets numbers down by 5. What do we expect as the response? Get back to me. I'll need a report on that in 3 months. And then we file it under, one particular possible plan. And then if that ever comes up, it's tick, tack, tick. We're going to run, this is not Jade Helm. This is Jade Helm 65. And we have the documents. So you would, in theory, want to think all of that through clearly. You would want to run all of those scenarios in every possible version of outcome. You would want where the whole world's on your side and nobody in the world's on your side. That you would want to run a version of events where this happens not to you, but singular allies. Allies as a group. It's what you do if that's your job. That's your day to day. And especially in the national security apparatus and the intelligence community, you have a bunch of people who basically their job is nightmare scenario, right? So in their answer to nightmare scenario, if this nightmare scenario happens, this should be the response. And every functioning big government, in the world of a country of note is doing the exact same thing all the time, if they have the means and wherewithal, and if they have any brains at all. The same thing is becoming true of political parties within a country because of foreign interests, especially right now, siding with the Republican Party against the United States, and foreign interests in intending to either side with or against the Democratic Party against the interests of the United States. Be it, Confucius Institutes and universities, or, on the left, or Russian NRA influence on the right. This is a real, like I think the Swalwell story about the Chinese operative who was trying to work her way into his inner circle using donations and the like. All of that is it's a real concern. They're looking at the people who might run for president. He did. They weren't wrong about it to target him. They also, possibly in looking into that person, ironically enough, inflate his ability to earn money or raise money as far as campaigning goes, which would make it more likely that he would run because of the background support. And the fact that the FBI went, hey, by the way, that's a Chinese operative, and he cut off all connections, and then they eventually spirited her away, is very telling, and it is a normal part of world operations. It has been for a long time. I mean, go watch the Manchurian Candidate. None of this was invented in the 2000s or since 9/11. It's an absurdity. By the way, hi everybody, welcome. Good to see you. Glad you're here. I know it's not a regular show. This is just me driving and chatting. I wish I could incorporate the chat into this, but it is not wise while driving because I find you guys to be smart, engaging, and valuable to the conversation, and therefore I will look at the screen and drive into a retaining wall or the back of the truck, and that would not be wise. So I will look at it later, though. So I appreciate it. And that includes, by the way, any trolls. I will make sure to check out your stuff. Thank you for being here and elevating our numbers, as always. And don't forget to subscribe. Hit subscribe on Twitch if you haven't already. If you're already a subscriber on Twitch, maybe gift a subscription to one of the people who's just following. Unless they're the trolls that follow, in which case, let them find their own way. I mean, they've all got Amazon Prime. I don't know. Maybe that's not true. That's rude of me. Maybe you can't sign up for Amazon Prime in Macedonia. Anyways, the fascinating story as I'm driving, the two big stories that were standing out is this kind of RNC hack by Cozy Bear and and Russian allied hacker groups. Not surprising at all. They have outlived their usefulness and very well may be in for they may be about to go through some things, ironically enough. And if you lie down with dogs, you're going to get up with fleas. That's life. The other story, of course, is that I've been kind of looking into the background on it, of course, is the sort of our relationship with China and the economic tug and pull that will be our relationship with China over the next little bit. And I would fully expect, maybe under a different name, some version of TPP to resurface. And it may, because of how people feel about trade alliances and the bad, NAFTA gave everybody, the reasons for the economic issues that everybody lays on NAFTA are not 100% allied with what went on. But there's a significant amount of it that is worthwhile, and so everybody's they vacillate between being overly paranoid of trade agreements and understandably wary in the modern economic environment. And so TPP itself may, and this would, again, if I were running things and you needed to get this done and you knew it was bad optics, but it was valuable for the country and the citizenry as a whole, they just didn't like it because they didn't understand it or were burned before, so they don't feel. It's like asking your friend to go out on a date after they've just gotten out of a bad relationship. You know their type. You found somebody great who looks kind of like their ex but has none of their bad qualities. You're not going to go, I have somebody for you. They're fantastic. I'm going to set you guys up, because they'll shut it down immediately. What you would do is invite that person to a party you've invited them to and let them meet semi-organically. So my theory about another version of TPP will come through tacit agreements that stack one upon the next. So we, instead of being set up on a blind date with this trade agreement with all of our trans-Pacific partners, we just go to a party where everybody's there and we just get along. It's not that strange a concept, but it will definitely be. That's how you would get it done if you wanted it to happen and you knew it was good for the public, even though they were against it, which happens. If you don't believe me, check vaccines. There's a large number of people for whom the vaccine would be a very good thing, but they are in effect against it. Another good example would be the one we've mentioned before, which is, of course, Kentucky Connect, the Obamacare version, the Kentucky version of Obamacare, wherein people were signing up for Kentucky Connect at state fairs, and my mom was actually working at these booths helping people do this, and they were going, well, at least it ain't that Obamacare stuff. We're signing up for Kentucky Connect. That's real. And I'm not going to sign up for that Obamacare. And somebody was like, it is the Obamacare. My mom was like, shh, just let them sign up. It'll save their life. And if they're not smart enough to figure that out on their own and recognize, then don't. So this is the Kentucky. There will be very possibly a Kentucky Connect version of TPP that will involve Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, and possibly, some, I guess, offshoot, maybe Macau and some offshoot Hong Kong businesses that have had to move, dealing with stuff, in regards to manufacturing on the Chinese mainland and the like. That I believe that will make a comeback in one form or another over the next 2 years. Won't be right away, but it is a necessity if we're not going to just fall back into China owns all the manufacturing in Southeast Asia, and that's just it. And we're just going to cede that ground to on not only on our behalf, but on Europe's behalf and the rest of Asia's behalf. That we just help them get there and then make sure they stay there. It seems very weird, considering the civil rights record, considering Hong Kong, considering intellectual property rights. Like, these are all issues we are not having with the South Koreas of the world or the Taiwans of the world at all. So, if one would think we would want to partner with those kind of countries that are like-minded, at least in their ethical desires, and try to make that part of the launch. So, that's, I've been watching that, kind of stuff in the background beyond like financial market stuff, which is always fascinating to me and very squirrely. There's so much in our economic outlook for the country that's assumed, because of how it's spoken of, especially the national debt. Right now, China's national debt is 300% of its GDP. Ours is about 100%, technically, of GDP. If you tell that to most people, I don't know that they would even grasp it. I also don't think that people recognize China's, expansion into Africa and the cost of that expansion. That they're not building roads and stuff, and train lines and pipelines for nothing. They expect rights and ports and control. And the ports are not to bring stuff in, but to take stuff out. And if at some point there's going to be a point where if Africa wants to sell anything to the world, China gets a cut permanently, and that's kind of the end goal. Whereas, say what you will about the United States and corporate interests versus government interests, but a good portion of the expansion that you've seen from the UN and what any number of countries and their NGOs have done in China or in Africa doesn't come with a stakeholder price the way it does with China. I'm sure with Exxon and the likes, I have no doubt there's but in terms of the actual government forces, it's a different animal altogether, comparatively. And I think it's just been written off. It's just like there's almost a conversation in the American media like China and Africa deserve each other. It's really odd, and it will increasingly be a problem. And then of course their border issue over Tibet with India is about water, lack of arable land in China, the food shortages there. That's what that fighting is about. All these soldiers punching each other in an area where nobody's allowed to have guns is eventually going to break out once people get thirsty enough. And in dealing with climate change, one of the reasons why Biden's talking about why the military said climate change is our biggest physical threat, whereas Russia might be our biggest cyber threat, China might be our biggest espionage threat, other countries might be our biggest terrorist threat, but on a scale that isn't going to wipe out large portions of the Earth's population, allies and enemies alike. Climate change is, and especially when you're talking about running out of water and millions of if not in some cases a billion people not having access to water and food over the next year. And when you run low on resources or the financial ability for support countries to large die-offs possible simply because the aid workers' trucks can't get there anymore because their tires melt, because their engines don't work, because if they go they'll never come back. And that's where everybody starts, whether they're on board with supporting, a cleaner climate right now, they will be. The question is, will that be too late? So, and hi everybody, welcome. Not the regular show. I know some of you are coming in late to the process. That's okay. We're all right. We're hanging out as I'm driving into Los Angeles. I was supposed to be there by now. I'll be on for another 15 minutes if that's tomorrow. When I get back to Vegas, and because I have to go. I'm going in for Masons tonight. It's our stated meeting, first Tuesday of the month. So it's our first one back. So as an officer, I am going back to be a part of Lodge, and I'm very happy about that. So I have my suits in the back, and I'm very excited. Now, because I'm an officer, I don't have to bring my apron. In case anybody's wondering, my apron's in a case, and probably to be framed, except for certain things until I'm buried with it. But it's another story for another time. That said, I wish I could check in with the chat room and say hi to you guys, honestly, as I'm driving. But again, it's not wise, and I will check in later on. I'm on the 210 right now, pretty wide open. Okay. I've been looking at, after the John Cena China thing, and everybody knows my love of Chinese culture and the Chinese people, and certainly that includes Taiwan, and largely based around our our fellow Americans of Chinese descent. Big adoration for them on those fronts. That my frustration with the government, it's like to some degree it's like the Russian people. I have nothing against the Russian people, but their government is a criminal kleptocracy, like basically a mafia, running stuff, and it makes you pity the people who live there. And there's a couple of things about China, and like watching kind of the research stuff that I was doing, documentaries they put out, stuff from here, people who've left, people who are still there. I have always had this feeling, and it especially came out when I was there, when I went to China. And for those of you that don't know, I was there like 9 months, a month at a time over the course of a couple of years, doing a travel show that never finished because we were supposed to go back for another round of things to finish them up, and then COVID hit, and that was that. And I don't know that a lot of isn't this pretty kind of travel stuff will be very helpful currently. But while I was there, and this is why I'm thinking about it, is I'm approaching Los Angeles, and the traffic will no doubt get tougher. And I had traffic coming through the pass, coming back from Vegas. That I was in several cities in China where there were supposedly, like in the case of Chongqing, which is, for those of you that don't know, it's a city that was liberated from the Japanese by American fighter pilots, and they have statues of them there. It was the capital of China for a couple of years during World War II, because the Japanese had driven everybody out of the eastern side of China. So the equivalent would be, that I use as the descriptor is, imagine if the Germans had attacked the United States during World War II and had driven us out of Washington, D.C., and it pushed the entire American political structure all the way to Denver. Imagine that happening to a country that Washington, D.C. had to run out of Denver because they'd been pushed back so far by the Germans. That's what happened with China and the Japanese in terms of Beijing moving and what structure was in Nanjing moving to Chongqing. And Chongqing, though, right now is, if you look at it, it's like in a valley, and I wish I could put up pictures of it. You can look it up on your own. It looks like a Blade Runner kind of city. It's just like stacks and stacks of super tall buildings surrounded by mountains, like hillside, like in the center of this thing. And the population of Chongqing, when they were telling me this, was 35 million people, which is more than Australia. I think Australia's got something like 28 million people, something like that, in the whole country. And Chongqing, one city, has 35 million people in it. This is what we were places. We stayed in this building that was like a really nice hotel, and it was between us and the city view. There were two copies of the Chrysler building, if you're familiar in New York City, two exact replicas of the Chrysler building, but instead of silver, gold, and with a bridge between them. Really ridiculous. Just obviously reconstructions, slightly shorter, I think, maybe, but two of them side by side, and then just giant skyscrapers with like video LED screens on the sides of them, and just constant lights, and like a nightly show of like fireworks, like lights and advertisements on these buildings, all like Blade Runner. And the most recent one, I think, for most people, although because it makes the original Blade Runner look quaint by comparison. And then there was this market area where we went, and I got there were like temporary tattoo places. So I got one on my back. It was really cool. And we did just like little tourist things throughout the city while we were there. And outside of Chongqing, there are these giant, there's another big ghost city. There's a lot of Chinese ghost cities, which is just buildings that are empty, just rows and rows of empty skyscrapers. Oh, and I might have dropped off. I hope not. Let's see. Yeah, let's see. Hope I'm still on. Let's see. It says I'm live, so fingers crossed. But I mean, just look up Chinese ghost cities on YouTube. It's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. But we saw them in person. We drove past them. We drove through them. I rode a train. There I am. Hi. Hey, I made it back. I think so. Anyway, sorry guys, I dropped off. So where was I? Chongqing. Okay, so hopefully this picks up. Where I was. So if you haven't looked up, I don't know where it cut off, so I have to go back a little bit. I was in, when I was in Chongqing, there's a huge ghost city outside of Chongqing in China. And, so like I said, we drove past them. I rode trains past them when we were going through the countryside. We were in one of the, we were on one of the bullet trains, and in riding one of the bullet trains, we were passing all this new construction. I always joke that the Chinese national anthem shouldn't be a panda; it should be a crane because of all the building that we were seeing. But the buildings that were being built were kind of in the middle of nowhere, and no one was living in the ones they'd already built. And it wasn't like, okay, they just finished these 10 weeks ago, and these are new ones, and then they're going to open the whole thing. A lot of them had been there for years, and there was no one in them, and then they're still building more. Really odd. So when we were in Chongqing, and I understand that Chongqing sounds like someone making fun of the Chinese language. That's the name of the city, and it's always, whenever I'm talking to people about my travel and I bring up this particular city, that always seems to bring a smile to their face or make them like feel slightly embarrassed or something because of the pronunciation of the name. But that's the real name of the city, and it's huge. In passing through the ghost cities on our way in, maybe it just set me up to kind of be on the lookout for it. But while I was traveling through the city, the traffic and crowding as far as people around me was really no different than I'd experienced. It was less than Los Angeles. And people could say, well, there's just fewer people with cars because of the volume of people in it. No. Even with at that number, if 35 million, if just a small percentage of them have cars, it's still more people than have cars in Los Angeles. It's just, you have to start getting a grip with, if all of, I don't know, like, if Cincinnati held the entire population of Australia, that's the size we're talking about. So understand what that would be like. If you went to the store, or you were going out to see a show, or you had to commute to work, what would traffic be like if the entire population of Australia lived in Cincinnati, and you worked downtown, and you lived across the bridge in Covington, Kentucky, and that's how you had to get to work? It would be insane. They'd have to build a double-decker bridge for everybody to cross all the time. It would be locked up until they did. It would just be insane, the volume of traffic. And having been, an Angelino since 1988 for all practical purposes. I'm familiar with crowded streets, large gatherings, and traffic. And when I was in Chongqing in this, shooting this thing, we were going to places where there was a lot of people, a lot of travel. We were supposed to go to the most popular areas, and still, every time I would go someplace, I could stick my arms out to either side and walk, through a market or where, because there just weren't that many people. There were a lot of people, but there weren't a lot of people. If you know what I mean. There was a suspiciously low number of people for a city that supposedly has 35 million people in it. It just didn't make sense. And so that was the root of my belief over time that there just aren't that many people in China. That the population numbers, especially because of the one-child policy, are completely overblown. And in their standoff with India, which clearly does have a billion people in it, if you look at Calcutta or you look at any of the big cities or even the smaller ones, the volume of people, living, elbow to elbow with other people is obvious, the overcrowding in those parts of the world. So if you were China, you would want to make it look like you had just as many people. So if we ever go to war, we can meet you one for one. Or if the United States ever wants to mess with us, we've got 3 people for every person you have, plus whatever. And so I just don't buy it. That's the long story short. And as we look at the amount of debt and the fact that they're buying food from us to feed folks, it's a after we know about the trade deal that Trump felt very good about, but then just after COVID he just didn't feel right. He just didn't feel right. After that, I have just it's just been like a haunting question for me. Like, how many people really live there? Like, really. It's like rich on paper people that live in Beverly Hills, but aren't really that rich. We're really scrapping by. The very people that brought you secondhand clothes as hipster clothing, because the reality was they couldn't afford to buy the big designer stuff, so they're like, we'll just make the cheap stuff hip, and we'll live that. That was born out of an artificial necessity. But yeah, the cool kid at school is wearing jeans with the knees blown out because he wants to, not because he has to, even though he really has to, because that's where they are. It just looks like a smokescreen. So that's what I've been kind of ruminating about in terms of, especially when it comes to like financial production, the number of millionaires and billionaires they allegedly have in the country, which again, my question has always been, are you a billionaire if you can't leave the country with your money? Well, no, clearly not. You know what I mean? It's like like being a princess trapped in a tower. Are you really a princess then? Or are you just a prisoner? What's the difference? The food's better? I don't know. The view? The prisoners eat crap food and they're under the castle. I've got a tower and some better food. Neither one of us can leave. So, but again, the food's better. For me, that's one of the curious parts about all this. And I would, like I said, I would love to engage with you guys on this conversation. I've got about a couple minutes left before I bow out, because I'm going to be hitting a bunch more traffic up here, and I won't even be able to look and check if I'm still on, which is nothing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with me Jeff Goldbluming, in a van, or in a truck, like I am talking to myself. That's the essence of chaos theory. So I won't be able to do that without wrecking, which is kind of self-defeating as a plan. I have to say, I'm going to be in town in Los Angeles on that, overnight, and then back to Vegas, and then back on the 18th, and then back more and more, because I'm obviously not only am I, do I have more shows in the city and work to do, and I live, both places effectively, is that I'm, planning on running for mayor of the joint, and you can't, hang most of the time someplace else if that's what your goal is. So that strategy goes into full bore in September in that regard. Some of the groundwork is being laid now, just letting you know. And it's consider this like a soft announcement, I guess. I've mentioned it on a couple other places, on Stuttering John's podcast and others. But as part of my thought process, where now I'm like, I'm getting pissed about it now, because I love LA so much. I'm getting annoyed at at mismanagement and poor running, that kind of stuff. The kind of stuff that drives you to actually want to do something about it. And my biggest issue for a lot of folks, not just here, but maybe to some degree in New York as well, but certainly the big cities, is that everybody wants the title, nobody wants the job. And that's a problem when it comes to politics, especially when you represent a constituency, especially when most of the time you're also representing 50% of the people in the city, and they didn't vote for you. As a matter of fact, they don't even like you, and yet you still have to make their lives better. And to come at it from that point of view, it would seem like it would take a different kind of person than the person who just wants the title. So that part's been kind of living rent-free in my head for a little while. And to anybody who's thinking about running for office, I encourage you to. We live in that kind of a country, and you should. But in the process of considering, what it means to be in that position of power, understanding that its power is only derived from the effectiveness of its service, in my way of thinking anyways. That the power of being a mayor or an alderman or a comptroller or a lieutenant governor or a governor, senator, or the president of the United States, even, the power of it only really comes from its effectiveness in terms of service. Anything short of that is just graft. You might as well just be a gangster or get involved in a pyramid scheme. Like, why bother running for office? You can do that everywhere else, right? So that for me is the purpose of public service, as it were. And I understand that that's not how everybody operates, but that's not important. What's important, I think, is how you would do things. And that's a good question. Like, ruminate on some of these things, and then whatever issue you care about, what is something that sticks with you, and then I want you to go through an exercise, if you're so inclined. Think of your best solution. What would you do? How would you solve it? And then imagine if that solution that you came up with actually destroyed what you were trying to help. Like, it just turned out not to work in such a way that it actually ballooned into a problem worse than the original problem. And it doesn't mean it will, but you have to be willing to go through that exercise. That if you were going to, that you come up with the best idea you can possibly do, but for whatever reason, it doesn't implement well, the public doesn't do it, there's a secondary thing you didn't think about, it falls apart, and it actually makes it worse. What is your fallback? What is your secondary solution? How do you fix the other problem that ruined the whole thing in the first place? What do you do? Because that's what service is. If you run upon somebody as a EMT and you check their pulse and you check their breathing and you start compressions on them, and every time you do a compression, you realize at that moment they have bullet holes in them and blood is just coming out, and you're actually causing more damage doing that than if you defib them and did something else. If you didn't have that initial, you were just committed to compressions, no matter what happens. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what's supposed to work. It should work. But there are other aspects that end up, where the best plan you have and the only response you have ends up killing the person or not solving the problem, certainly. What do you do then? And I think that's one of the essentials of public service currently that people don't consider. And I don't mean politicians necessarily themselves. I mean the electorate. I mean the citizenry. I think a lot of us in our own lives, whatever problem we're looking to solve in our own lives, we have a singular focus on what our first plan of attack is, and we'll come up with another plan if that one doesn't work at the time. But when other people's lives are on the line, it's a parental thing, but it's also, if you're in a position of service, you got to have a fallback in case your big, brilliant idea doesn't work. We certainly live in a time where if somebody comes up with an idea and it doesn't work, where they'll just get blamed for the failure instead of, well, you tried, that just didn't function or whatever. What else you got? And largely because we're, of the ego involved, the personality issues that people have. There's a lot, I think, on a personal level that people have invested in being right or wrong in a situation because being right is so lined up with their ethics or their worth as opposed to being effective, for example. If you were wrong, and you went, I figured out I was wrong early. We're doing something else. Let's do this. Everybody stop. Put down what you're doing. This is not working. We got to do something else. And we recognize that while we were fixing this one problem, this other problem was actually the root of it. And we've been focusing our efforts in the wrong direction. It takes a tremendous amount of moral strength to do that. And I think that in life, at some point, for the betterment of humanity, we are going to have to find a way to encourage that kind of behavior while still feeling like we're only following the best ideas and supporting success instead of rewarding failure. Like that's what everybody's afraid of in it. That's why you don't admit defeat or failure, because next. Because it's, people are born with good ideas. They don't come up with them. They don't recognize and adapt. We have to, we'll just broom this person and the next person will have an idea that works. When you're in a situation where somebody's got, 4 years in office or 6 years in office and they just got in there, we have got to start cultivating as a society and as humanity the ability to go, there's nothing wrong with saying you're wrong and fixing it, backing out and creating a better plan instead of like, no, this should work, which I see a lot of online especially, but certainly in politics. This should work. Why wouldn't it work? This should work. It's their fault this doesn't work, instead of no, it just doesn't work because it's impractical to the reality of humanity in this current age. A solution that only works in a utopia is not a solution. Never will be. It's one of those things where you come up with a scientific solution to a mathematical solution to where you do not have all the variables, and then shrug off the need to find out what those variables are, when those variables very well do, mean life or death for somebody. So, anyways, that's just kind of shared thoughts. I don't even know if I'm still on the air right now. I'm probably just talking in my thought. So, let's see. I'm coming up on some like city traffic. I will sign off. I will let you guys go. Take care of yourself and take care of somebody else. I will see you on the regular stream tomorrow. Thanks for jumping in here with me. I will again, go back and scroll through the chat and and like and look at everybody and kind of mention it tomorrow as best I can. If there's any thoughts that come from that, I appreciate it. Sorry for the different version of shows, but this is just this is life sometimes in the world of live streaming. I appreciate it, and I will see you guys later. Bye. See ya. Be safe.